Hello and welcome back to my channel. I think it is about time I do another episode of Jokes on Me. I could have sworn I did 2 episodes last year, but no, it was only the one which I did back in May. I mean, that round was kind of abysmal in terms of progress, since I moved only 2 spaces with 3 card flips and I still had to read 7 books. So, you know, maybe I was just a little nervous to continue, but now I really want to get going again. I was planning to start it in February, but it's the 18th of January today, and I couldn't really think of any good reason why I should wait. So I'm starting now. So Jokes on Me is a TBR game. It's created by Bailey of Is Bailey Reading, and you move around a board with different prompts on it using playing cards. So I do 3 card flips, which will then give me 3 or more reading prompts. And then I have a book that is a personal choice, which is just any book I want to read. I did in fact already film the card flips yesterday, so let's go to past me to see where I got on the board, and then after it's back to current me to see what books I've picked out. Alright, let's do the card flips. Last time I ended up over here, and honestly I thought we were further along, but I really did only get to manage to here in 2 episodes. So yeah, I've shuffled my cards before, but let's shuffle them a couple more times, just so you know I'm not cheating. And for full disclosure, I have taken out all the jacks, kings and queens, because they are for unhauling and buying books, which is not something I necessarily want to do right now. So let's go for our first card flip. That's an ace. I'm pretty sure ace was just 1 space. So that's what I'm going for. That is a reread of choice. Cool. Then we've got a 6, which is splitted 3 by 3. So we've got 1, 2, 3. That's the first book I see on YouTube. And then 1, 2, 3. New year, which is I'm doing a challenge on the story graph, which is read a book from every year from I think 1901 until 2020. So I'm gonna pick one from those. And then a last card flip is a 3, which is do all 3 prompts. So we've got next on Storygraph, which is using their up next feature. We've got a book from the library, and we've got a book from the Republic of Consciousness Prize. Just cutting in to show you my up next page on Storygraph, so you can see what I'm picking out. So you go here, you go on suggestions, and then it will generate suggestions. So let's see, we've got Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. Just to be fair, my Storygraph TBR is also books that I want to read, not necessarily everything I own, so not everything will be available to me. Okay, so we've got Lote by Shola from Reinhold, which is definitely something I would want to read. I own that, not sure I want to read that right now. This could be a good one. Although it would also work for the Republic of Consciousness Prize prompt, so maybe I'll use it for that. This one I have on my TBR spin, so I'm not going to read that one. This I'm not sure I have available. This one definitely won't have available right now. Maybe this one, I can get that from the library. That's a double up, which I find annoying. Maybe this one. I'm thinking either this one or I'll read this. Alright, so at least we've moved forward on the board a decent amount. but we still have 6 books this round, plus a My Choice book. So it's going to be a substantial video. Before I did the card flips, I was like, this could be my video for February, but yeah, no, that's not going to happen. So current January me apologizes for you watching this in March, April, for not having a video up in February. So the first prompt was a reread of choice, which is perfect because we are still in Read It January, which is a readathon where I do rereads in January. And the book that's kind of been calling to me is this one, A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza. This is one of those books that I remember really loving, but I can't quite remember what it was about this book that I loved. Do I remember something about the plot other than it being a family coming back together for a wedding? Also not so much, but I'm excited to get back into a book that I know is going to be good. The next I had first on YouTube. For this I'll just continue on my watch later list, just as I would normally do, you know, not purposefully clicking on videos I think will have good books in them, and then pick the first book that someone talks about that is available to me straight away, so without me having to buy it or like have a long waiting list on a library. Right now my watch later list is basically half best books of 2025 and half reading goals for 2026, so this could have gone either way. You know, either being someone's favorite book of last year, or it will be like in 2026 I finally want to read Ulysses or something like that. The video that came up next was of Karen, of the Roving Reader, which was kind of a reflection of the year, looking back to the new year kind of video, and she did also mention in that video her top 3 favorite books of 2025. One of them was 54 Miles by Leonard Pitts Jr, which isn't available to me right now, but in talking about that book she also mentioned the last Thing You Surrender, which I can actually read through Kobo Plus, and I had put it on my TBR when she mentioned this book on her channel before. So yeah, I am excited to get to read one of my BookTube besties' favorite books, even though it is a chunky 500 plus page book. And then the next one was New Year, which is based on the Storygraph challenge I'm doing, where I'm reading one book for every year between 1900 and 2020. And I chose The King of a Rainy Country by Bridget Brophy, which was first published in 1956. And this says it is a delightful queer quest for love and a comic jaunt across Europe that's sharp, funny and clever and fresh as new paint, according to the Times. I read 2 McNally editions last year and they both ended up on my favorites list, so just for that alone I have high hopes for this one. Then we had next on Storygraph, which I think I showed you. Right now I'm leaning towards reading Lote, which has been on my TBR for a while. There was quite a few people reading it when it first came out, and so that's why I put it on my TBR back then. I haven't a clue what the book is about, but I'm pretty sure it's queer, it's a little different, it's indie published, and it has the potential of a good time. Next was a book from the library. Now the only 2 books I have out from the library are these 2. The World According to Garp by John Irving and Looking for Alaska by John Green, which both I'm not particularly in the mood to read right now. So I think I'll visit the library soon to find something else. This evening is also going to be the first live show for the new TBR track game, so I might find something that will fit that as well. So, you know, TBD, let's say. And then last I had a Republic of Consciousness prize, which is to read one of the books I got through their subscription. I did cancel my subscription at the end of last year just because I think they changed something in the way they sent books. So now I suddenly had to pay import fees when before I hadn't, and it was just getting a little bit too expensive. But for now I still have 7 or 8 of their books that I haven't read yet. I ended up picking Amma by Saraid de Silva. It is published by Weatherglass Books. Let me read you the back. It says 1951, Singapore. 10-year-old Josephine kills her abuser. This event becomes the defining moment in the lives of Josephina, her daughter Sitara, and her granddaughter Annie. The effects cascade through generations as Annie sets out across the world to discover what happened to fracture her family. Set in Sri Lanka, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, and London, Amma is a novel about family, displacement, queerness, and how the past lives with us forever. Yeah, I think that sounds like something I might enjoy. So yeah, that's my TBR for now. I might change something out, I might not, and I'll catch up with you when I've read something. Okay, the first book I finished reading for this is A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza. This was for the prompt to reread a book of choice. And I think I loved it even more on this reread. I remember being really impressed by the book the first time around and, you know, really loving the story and the writing style. But now this book really got to me on an emotional level as well, meaning I wept reading this book. This book centers around an Indian Muslim family, and we start the book at the eldest daughter's Hadia's wedding, and we also very soon learn that the youngest child, the only boy in the family, has been estranged from this family for a number of years, but he did get invited to the wedding and then also came to the wedding. I'll read you the first sentence of the book because it's one of those first sentences that I think so much of the book, what the book is about, is already revealed. This year I've started to write down the first sentences of the books I read, instead of keeping up with a spreadsheet or like the story graph, I'm writing down the first sentence and the title of the book as a list of what I've been reading this year. And yeah, this is the one for this book. As Amar watched the hall filled with guests arriving for his sister's wedding, he promised himself he would stay. We have this wedding setting, the estranged son shows up, and it's a very tense and weighted situation because obviously things have happened in the past that put a strain on the family relations, especially between Amar and his father. And then for the next part of the book, we then jump around to different moments in this family's past, where we slowly get the puzzle pieces to figure out what has caused this rift in the family. Like I said, they are a Muslim family who are, I wouldn't say necessarily traditional or rigorous in their beliefs, but they are devout in a way, and their faith does influence the choices they make and the values that are upheld in this family. We have a father who is strict in that he holds a high standard for his children and expects a lot from them, and the children all deal with this, their fate and their role in the family, in their own individual ways. I think at first glance this is a story that you will have read before. It's a family where traditional values are important, with a strict father, an eldest daughter who aspires to do right by her family, who works hard and studious, a middle daughter who is somewhat invisible but is still like the secret glue holding them all together, a younger son who is adored by his mother and rebels against his father and what he stands for. Like, I wouldn't say it's super original in its story, but I do think that this is done with a depth and nuance that I often find lacking in similar stories. I think the discussion on religion was done with a lot of grace. It shows how they celebrate their culture and their beliefs, especially when it's not the dominant culture they see in their community around them. 9/11 is a part of this book, and that also changes how they present their faith outwardly. And like I said before, their fate is never at the forefront of the story, but it does influence the outlook, their outlook on life and the decisions they make. And for each individual, you see the parts of their fates that they struggle with and how they incorporate that in their reality and their world. I really love how this book was structured. I loved how we jumped to different pivotal moments in their lives. In the family when the children were young, but also when the parents met and in their early marriage. And I really enjoyed that because we moved around in time and also in perspective, and because of that you didn't always realize the weight of a moment until later on, when some time had passed, or when you saw that same moment through a different family member's eyes. The last part of the book is just from the father's perspective, and I think seeing his thoughts, when he's been depicted as someone who's very quiet and stoic and kind of rigid in his convictions, just puts like a real different light and nuance to everything that we see happening in the book before. I thought it was really cleverly done, and this book is very emotional. It made me cry in places. I don't always like it when a book makes me cry, and not in a way that I don't want to cry in books, but I think sometimes it is a book can be a little too obvious in the devices that the author uses to make a reader cry, and I'm often a little annoyed when I see those tools at work, and even more annoyed when they work and they make me cry and I'm feeling a little tricked. I know a lot of people will merit a book when it makes them cry, and I don't usually, but I think in this case the way the emotional growth of the character was handled and the vulnerability that they showed in learning is what really got to me in this book. I really love this again. It had a real moment when it was first published, but if you didn't get around to it back then, I would still recommend checking this book out. I finished another book. This time I read Amma by Saraid de Silva, which was my choice for a Republic of Consciousness Prize book, and I think I might just read you the first sentence again, because like in my previous book, A Place for Us, the first sentence in this book is very telling. Also, I might just make it a thing for this year that whenever I'll review a book, I'll start it with the first sentence. I'll try that with this video, and then you can tell me if it's a good idea. I just really love a good first sentence, Okay, so the first sentence in this book is: Anna Fernando doesn't care much for men. This is both kind of stating the obvious as well as an understatement. Annie is a lesbian, so in that regard, she doesn't care much for men. But also she and the generations of women that came before her have experience with men being misogynistic on like one end of the spectrum and dangerously abusive on the other. So saying she doesn't care much for men would be an understatement. The book starts with Annie first setting foot in London after she has left New Zealand in search of her uncle Suri, who is estranged from the rest of the family for reasons that she doesn't yet know. And then every chapter we switch between the perspectives of Annie, her mother Cesara, and her grandmother Josefina. The timeline goes all the way back to 1951 when we first meet Josefina. She's 10 years old at that time. A British man comes to visit her family to arrange a marriage between his son and Josefina. He then rapes Josefina, and Josefina in turn kills him. The book then sort of follows a similar structure as in A Place for Us. We jump around in perspective and also in time and place. This book is set over a number of different countries. Like I said, it starts in London, also part of it is set in New Zealand, part in Sri Lanka and part in Singapore, I think. In this book, each chapter is headed by the name of whose perspective we're reading from and the year and the city we are in. So it's a little bit more easy to follow than A Place for Us. But it does have that sort of non-linear timeline that I really enjoy. There's a lot of themes in this book that I enjoy, or rather am interested in reading about, because enjoy is maybe not the best word, such as intergenerational trauma, the messiness of motherhood, different roles that women can take with different people, family dynamics, family secrets that change how different family members are viewed depending on the narrative they've been told, migration, finding identity. These are all like buzzwords that really pique my interest. Do I think this book is particularly original in the way it handles these themes? Probably not. Probably not, but I do still think it's very well written. It has beautiful prose. I like that the characters are flawed. I just think it's a good, sort of solid, well-crafted novel. I think the author took on a pretty ambitious project with tackling some really big themes and sort of weaving them together in a multi-generational family saga, but I do think she pulls it off. This book didn't really give me any new insights, but I do think it's crafted really, really well. So yeah, that was this book, and I've got 5 more to go. Okay, it's been a minute since I've last did an update for this video. By a minute I mean about a month, maybe a little bit more. I've been reading a lot for the BookTube prize. That video should already be up. But I also have read a couple of books for this video, so it is high time I did a little catch up. First up, I read my free pick book, and I ended up reading a book for Dawiton, which is like a readathon celebrating Welsh literature in March. Now there is a lot of great writers and literature I could have picked from. Some excellent Welsh writers, but I decided to finally read Hidden Depth by Ifan Morgan-Jones. This book was on my TBR because of Heather. She read it for Dawiton, or maybe Shorty September, a couple of years back, and I remember in her review she was like, this book was really wild, really cheesy, and maybe it's not very high quality, but I'm giving it 5 stars. And it just stuck with me, and I was like, I'm gonna read this weird little book someday. So that's what I did, and yeah, this book was so random but so fun. It starts with a boy. He's an orphan living with his foster parents, and he's kind of fed up and he runs away from home. And we meet him standing on a pier in the city he lives in, sort of looking out to the sea, when this old dude with a mossy beard stands next to him and tells him about this old Welsh Welsh legend. I can't remember the name of this legend, but it's basically about an old city that has sunk beneath the waves, like Atlantis style. So that's a bit random. And then he sees a weird glowing object flying in the sky and then disappearing in the sea. Also a bit random. We got to the next chapter. We jump ahead a couple of years. The boy is now grown up and he's kind of a drifter. He lives in a homeless shelter, and one night he says to his girlfriend, "You can't pin me down, I need to see what's out there." So yeah, he goes for a stroll in the park and he comes across a talking squirrel that like changes into another animal and tells him he needs to follow it. And then he wakes up on a swing set. Yeah, I could give you a play-by-play of the whole book, but I think you get the gist of where this is going, except that you'll never guess where this is going. I messaged Heather after reading this and I was like, this is like one of those school projects where you had to write a story and the teacher gives you like 5 random words that you need to put in the story. So like, we need aliens, underwater, homeless shelter, possession, and dragons. Also bonus points if you can tie it in with a Welsh legend. So yeah, this book was just wild and silly, and I had a really great time reading it. It was just exactly what I needed after reading, you know, a couple of really serious books for the BookTube prize. Okay, wait, let me do the first sentence because that's what I said I was going to do for this video. Okay, the first sentence in this book is, "Did you ever hear the legend of Cantref Gwaelod?" I hope I didn't entirely butcher that. It does remind me that I need to be reading up on some of the Welsh legends, since I'll be going there in a couple of months, but that's a story for another day. The next book I read was the one I picked for a new year, which was The King of a Rainy Country by Bridget Brophy, which was published in 1956. The first sentence of this book is, "I had been scared for a fortnight," which doesn't really tell you a lot about the rest of the book, but I do think it's a good first sentence. The book starts with 2 friends, or rather like a platonic couple, Neil and Susan. They live in a bit of a rundown flat in London. They're both very young and still trying to figure out what to do in life. He works in a kitchen, in a restaurant, and Susan just got a job helping out in an antiquarian bookstore. And it's in this job where she finds out that her boss specializes in, let's say, erotic photo albums, and it is one of those books that Susan comes across a picture of one of her old schoolmates, Cynthia. So Susan is talking to Neil about her, wondering what Cynthia would be doing now. They were quite close in school, and Susan had kind of a crush on Cynthia, but they grew apart, etc., etc. So they try and find her. It starts with like trying to contact her other school friends and looking through the phone book to find her name, and they soon find out that she's about to appear at a film festival in Venice. So they're like, let's go there. Oh wait, we don't have any money. But here's this job as a tour guide of like a group of American tourists that will pay all travel and board. So what follows is this quest across France and Italy to find this schoolgirl crush. So yeah, what did I think of this? I'm not really sure. I found some parts really funny, especially the part where they take this busload of Americans around France and Italy. There's some really weirdo characters there, and I loved the commentary on like American versus European tourists, and trying to blend different cultures. Like even if this book was written in the 50s, it was still very recognizable today. It all felt a little absurd, and I quite like that. I think the writing style in general feels very clever and precise and just funny. I also enjoyed that we had two young characters that lived kind of a bohemian, aimless lifestyle, which at this point in my life I find both scary and intimidating, but also incredibly refreshing. I enjoyed seeing them living in the now, just thinking of something they could do and then just doing it, not thinking about the consequences, or rather not thinking about them, but more this we'll deal with it when we get to that kind of attitude. Yeah, that's something I liked in this book. I liked the queer subtext in this plot. The author was queer herself, I believe. She was openly bisexual, and the book played with non-traditional relationships and different gender roles. So yeah, there were parts in this book that I liked, but overall I had a hard time getting into the story. I didn't really feel any emotional connection to any of the characters, and that made it hard for me to get invested in what happened to them. So yeah, it just had an emotional distance, and also I didn't think it helped that the plot overall felt a bit disjointed or uneven. So yeah, I just didn't really know what to make of it in the end. But yeah, still glad I read it. And then lastly, for this update, I read Lote by Shola von Reinhold, which was for the Republic of Consciousness Prize prompt. This book won that prize in 2021. First sentence of this book is, "An incense blonde twink said, 'Excuse me, miss, where do you think you're going?'" So this is another book that's a little harder to grasp, which is what I love about this literary prize, because it celebrates indie publishers who often choose books to publish that are a little harder to pinpoint, you know, a little bit more unconventional. So that's kind of what I signed up for, and that's what I got. In this book, the protagonist, Matilda, she is fascinated by some forgotten artists and writers from the past, especially black and queer artists, and especially from like 1920s, 1930s Britain. She calls them her transfictions, and her latest transfiction is Hermia Druid, who was a black Scottish poet. Now, Hermia Druid is a fictional character, but the author places her within a group called the Bright Young Things. They were like a group of often aristocratic young people in 1920s London who were sort of famous for their extravagant lifestyle and, you know, really fabulous costume parties. And it was often said that they were like one of the first groups of sort of like celebrity culture. The paper would write about what this group of people were up to. So Matilda, kind of on a whim, decides to apply for an artist residency in a town called Dunn, where Hermia once lived, just so she can learn more about her. But once she gets into this residency, she learns that the other people on it are very serious. They are very austere, very sort of joyless, a little pretentious, you know, just sticking to the books and sticking to the theory. And Matilda, who was fascinated by Hermia because of her flamboyance and her love of fashion, her queerness and her blackness, feels like she doesn't really fit in with the group. So yeah, it's kind of about Matilda trying to figure out why Hermia, her transfiction, is left out in the museums and art history, when it was obvious that she moved in a lot of the same circles with people who did survive the test of time. Yeah, this book is really weird, but in a good way. I love how it juxtaposed queerness and heteronormativity. The book in that sense was very visual and very textual in that way. There was a lot of imagery of like black and white versus colorful, drab and boring versus flamboyant, functional versus ornamental, and you could see that in the way people dressed, where they lived, like even to the food and drinks they had. It also had a bit of a culty vibe, with the people on the residency being really obsessed with this one guy who apparently wrote some theories on art, you know, and everyone kind of revering him and always carrying this like yellow book with them that he apparently wrote. But then also, you know, Matilda's fascination with this one group of people, almost like being a fan and having a bit of a parasocial relationship with them. Yeah, I just feel like this book had a lot going on. Not sure I completely understood everything. There's definitely things that went over my head, but I actually enjoyed that it was confusing and a little baffling. Because even though I didn't 100% get it, I could tell that the author knew what was going on and that she constructed this novel very carefully and put a lot of thought into it. So yeah, I don't know if this review was helpful in any kind of way, but I think that if it sounds at least a little interesting to you, you should give it a go and then tell me what you thought about it. So yeah, that's my update for now. I still have 2 books to go. One of them which I'm reading right now and I'm really enjoying, so I look forward to telling you about that once I finish that. I finished my final 2 books for this video. The first one being my book from the library. I actually saw that my library had this thing called the Book Scout. I had to fill in a questionnaire about what kind of books I like, who my favorite authors were, what you are looking for in a next read, or what you don't like, etc. And then the library, you know, or someone working at the library will put aside 5 books that that they think you would like. So that's what I did, and one of the books they put aside for me was this one. It is a non-fiction book, and one of the things I mentioned on the forum was that I would like to read some more narrative non-fiction, and this was just exactly the kind of book I was looking for. So this is De Ontdekking van Urk by Matthias M.R. de Klerk, and the title translates as The Discovery of Urk. Urk being a town in the Netherlands. If you're not from the Netherlands, I highly doubt you've ever heard of the place, but everyone here knows this town, even though it's not especially big in size or anything. It's a town that used to be an island. I'll show you a picture so you can see. So the central body of water used to be kind of a bay from the North Sea, until the 1930s, I think, and they built a dike right at the top, and it was closed off, and the sea became a lake, and there was also large portions of land reclaimed. So what used to be sea is now land, and you can say that even though Urk is not an island anymore, it still has this really persistent island mentality, and just some things that make it stand out from the rest of the country. For one, it still has a very close connection to fishing. A very large proportion of employment is still either actual fishermen on boats or to any other job relating to fishing, like the processing of fish or boat building, things like that. And the sea and fishing are very much woven into the lifestyle. And 2, the town is known for being very religious and very conservative. You know, there's very large families, people go to church twice a day on Sunday, and everything that can be even remotely be considered left-wing is kind of frowned upon. And then lastly, this town is also known for being a very close-knit and very sort of closed-off community. They don't like strangers, they don't trust people outside of the community, everyone kind of knows about everyone's business, in both the positive and negative sense of the word. They want to take care of things within the community themselves, and they don't like it when other people or outsiders tell them what to do. So yeah, the author of this book is a journalist, and he was working at a Belgian newspaper when he got the job of covering a tragic death of a boy from this town. He got to the town, he wrote his article, and then he left. But then 10 years later, he was still thinking about this town, being fascinated by it and wanting to learn more about these sort of singular, closed-off people. So he decides to live there for a while, 6 months in total, and try to learn as much as possible. He lives with a host family, and very slowly he tries to get a glimpse of what defines Urk, what defines the town. Yeah, and I thought this was a really interesting read. You very much follow the author as he learns more and more. It's very much, you know, him talking to some people, finding out some more things, following another lead, doing a deep dive in another topic. So it's not like, you know, a history of the town, you know, or something comprehensive, but more I lived here for a while as an outsider, and this is what I found out. And I would say it is partly what the stereotype says, or the image that people from Urk are trying very hard to create. You know, a very hard-working, God-fearing, independent people, but also the dark side of that. There's an incredible pressure to conform. There's no room for individuality. There's criminal activity when it comes to illegal fishing practices, teenagers that are out of control, drug abuse and alcohol abuse. And yeah, I'd say the biggest feeling I had after reading this book was one of relief, to be honest. You know, relief of not having to live in this town. I gained a lot more knowledge. I gained a certain respect, but also I still have a lot of incomprehension about this village and the people who live there, just because it's so far removed from my personal outlook on life. It's like I understood it more, but I don't comprehend it more. And yeah, I think that's exactly how the author came away from it, from his time there as well. And then the final book I read was The Last Thing You Surrender by Leonard Pitts Jr, which was my first on BookTube pick. It was one of Karen's favorite books. I don't think I loved it as much as she did, but I still thought it was really good. So it's a World War II historical fiction novel. And before you switch off, the World War II fiction market is really oversaturated. I do think this one is a little different, at least in some parts, and it sheds light on narratives that you don't often hear. So the book starts when Private George Simon is in his cabin on one of the ships in Pearl Harbor when it was attacked in 1941. The impact of the attack injures him, and he's probably broken a hip or a leg, and he's trying to get out because the ship is now sinking. And in the end, he is helped by a black messman who helps him bring to safety. But just before they can get off the ship, he is killed in kind of a freak accident. When he's back home on recovery leave, the government sees in this the perfect opportunity to get more people to join the war effort. You know, a black man saving a white man's life, that would be a great boost for morale to try and get more black people to sign up. So George is asked to visit his savior's widow and to go on a tour with her to inspire people. So he visits this woman, Thelma, who lives with her grandpa and her brother Luther, and obviously they don't think much of this idea. especially because Thelma and Lote's parents were both lynched by a white mob, and they feel that this war is not theirs. It's not their country to fight for. And George also in that moment realizes that maybe this isn't such a good idea. Anyway, you then continue to follow George, Thelma and Luther and some other people in lesser extent as they each live through the war and live in a Jim Crow South. And there keeps on being small threads that connects these people together. As you may guess, this is a very heavy book. There's a lot of violence in these pages. There's war battle, there's soldiers attacking other soldiers, there's racial violence, there's lynching, there's torture camps, domestic abuse, rape. This was absolutely relentless in its violence and in its depiction of hate. I am still kind of debating whether there was too much violence or not, because sometimes I think when violence is described so graphically and so repeatedly, it can almost desensitize you, and also it can sometimes feel like it's done for shock value. But on the other hand, I do think the book depicts a very realistic situation. You know, I do believe that for a black person living in Alabama at the time, they would have to be on guard at all times because white people could be unpredictably violent. You know, war is in its essence violent, and there was torture at prison camps. I would say it shows what the human race is capable of doing to another human being if they don't see them as other human beings. Like, that is the essence of what this book is about, and I think that that's something the book explores really well. The characters all go through this realizations of what it is to be human, the struggle to hold on to humanity and dignity, and the struggle of finding hope and decency and a human connection in a world that can be really cruel. So yeah, I thought it was really good, but I wouldn't say I loved it. Although I will say I do think it's a book that will linger for a while. So yeah, that were all the books I read for Jokes on Me. It is now nearing the end of April, so it took me nearly 3 months. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I have some other plans for next month, but I think I'll start a new episode of Jokes after that. So hopefully I'll see you again soon, and thanks for watching. Bye bye.